Well, welcome everyone officially to our latest Getting Hybrid Work Right call on this Thursday, February 3rd. As you've been doing, those that have joined us for a couple of minutes, please introduce yourself over in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from today. Welcome to everyone who's been on some of these previous calls. Welcome to any newcomers. If you are a newcomer and aren't familiar with I4CP, we are the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We discover the people practices that drive high performance, and we do this through all of the wealth of research that we do in human capital so that our members can really see what's coming around the curve. We allow some of our research to come out on some of these public calls, as we'll be doing today. We also have some other materials that are public, but we also have a lot of reports and in-depth research and analysis that is only for our members. The research that we do is very focused on high performance organizations. We look at revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction over a 5-year period when we're doing all of our human resources, human capital research studies. And what that allows us to do is look at what the top quartile, those high-performing organizations, are doing more often in their HR and people practices, and compare those with what the lower quartile, the bottom 25% of performing organizations are doing, to really tease out what high performers do more often than low. So we do that. I don't think any other firm really has that focus like we do. We are a member-driven organization. I mentioned our members just a few seconds ago. Here's just a small sampling of our member list at I4CP. We've got hundreds of member organizations, all different sizes too. I think a lot of people think we're only about the large enterprise organizations, and we certainly have a lot of them. You can see some of those big brands here, but we have a lot of smaller and medium-sized members as well. So we certainly don't discriminate along size lines. Want to introduce at this point my co-host on this call, our CEO and co-founder, Mr. Kevin Oakes. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Tom. And sorry I missed the last call, but I heard you did a great job running it solo. I had no doubts you wouldn't.
Thank you. Yeah, we spent the last call talking about what was at that time the fresh OSHA ETS ruling from the Supreme Court and the impact that had. We're going to continue that conversation for part of today's call, probably around the first half, and then we'll pivot to another big question around hybrid work, and that is around leadership roles, whether you're designating a particular leader during this transition to sort of lead strategy and execution, where you're taking more of a committee approach. So we're going to cover both of those topics today. But as I said earlier, I wanted to put this call in the context of the series that we have. We started doing these open to the public for all HR professionals type calls in March of 2020, and we were doing a lot of them throughout all of 2020. Scaled back a bit last year, but we were definitely keeping them going. And you see there on the right the range of topics that we're holding them. It's a pretty simple schedule. It's more or less every Thursday, barring any holidays. Every Thursday we have a call. Every other week is focused on getting hybrid work right, like today's call on this February 3rd. You see, next week we'll have a call focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and then back to getting hybrid work right, and then talent acquisition and so on. We'll take a break during the week of March 14th. That is our in-person conference, which is very exciting. Kevin, do you want to say a few words here about this conference?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to get back to Scottsdale. We've been running this conference for many years. The last decade, we've been at the Fairmont Princess in Scottsdale. This conference has been rated the #1 conference for HR executives. And I think a big reason for that, Tom, is we have just practitioners at this conference. So there's nobody else other than human capital practitioners and some thought leaders. And you can see that represented here in our speaker lineup. We've got a great lineup of thought leaders and CHROs and other HR executives from different companies. We just added Dan Pink. Dan just released his new book 2 days ago called Regret. So I'm thrilled to have Dan back at our conference. But you can see we have a lot of other very interesting and intriguing speakers. So hopefully you can join us in Scottsdale. It's always a great time. And there's a whole contingent of people that I've been talking to that just can't wait to get back to an in-person conference.
Yeah, absolutely. People have been saying that since the start of the pandemic. We didn't have this conference in Scottsdale in 2020 for obvious reasons. The pandemic in March was just getting underway in the United States. So we pivoted to an online version of the conference for November of 2020, and that was great. We had a great lineup of speakers, a lot of peer-to-peer learning, a lot of great presentations and breakouts. We did the same this past fall. We had another in-person virtual conference rather this past November. But yeah, we're super excited to be back in Scottsdale. I've been to it a few times. I've been with the company only 5 years at this point, but it's been a great event. And you see, this is only a small selection of the speakers that we're going to have. So great event. Registrations are still coming in. I know travel is sort of a weird thing right now, but a lot of people are making that commitment and are excited to be joining us. So we hope you will too. All right, let's dive into our first of two topics today, which is again considering the situation around vaccine mandates. These are just some of the many headlines that all of us have been seeing, or whether it's in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, HRE or USA Today, anywhere really. I shared some of these at our last meeting a couple weeks ago. The ones there at the top, Citigroup announcing, this was before the Supreme Court decision, that they would be firing any unvaccinated staff by the end of that month. Meta, formerly known as Facebook, of course, had a somewhat different announcement saying that they would be reopening their offices, but that would be a delayed process and that they're giving folks, I believe it was until March, to get their booster shots. On the flip side of that, you had companies like GE and Starbucks saying that, given the Supreme Court ruling on the OSHA ETS mandate, that they'd be sort of paring back and not going through with the mandates for their organization. And then you see some of the other ones. One of the most recent one, T-Mobile, giving an April 2nd deadline for workers to get vaccinated. Kevin, do you want to speak to some of these, or particularly that one on the left, maybe about the complication of all of this?
Well, so much of this is complicated, Tom, and there's a lot of different factions at work. But like you said with Citigroup, there were a number of companies who, prior to the Supreme Court ruling, had said that they weren't going to tolerate unvaccinated employees. And so it was either get vaccinated or no longer be employed by the organization. Accenture is probably the largest employer at 750,000 that I can think of that had that mandate in, and they've been done with that since November. And then, you mentioned some of the new companies, even despite the Supreme Court announcement, like T-Mobile, who have set that same kind of parameter inside the organization, or Carhartt, if you see in the bottom right there. The reason we put that in there, it shows some of the potential issues that you can run into. Carhartt, which caters more to a blue collar crowd with their products, has had some boycotting of their products when they said the same thing, that all employees need to be vaccinated or they'd no longer work at the company. But as you point out, Tom, some, in light of the Supreme Court ruling, have suspended their vaccination requirements, like GE and Starbucks and others. That the one that you point out on states are complicating corporate pandemic planning is also very interesting. In the two states that are easy to focus on are Florida and Texas. And there's a number of companies who, despite a global mandate, have said to their employees in Florida and Texas, based on state regulations, we're not going to require you to be vaccinated. There are others in those states who have said only people who are entering the buildings need to be vaccinated. And then in the city of New York, there's been a mandate that all employers, I think over 100 employees, have to be vaccinated. You know that one well, Tom, living in the state of New York. And so that's also I think causing companies to have different policies depending on where their employees are. So it's been a tricky thing to maneuver here, I think, for a lot of companies, and will continue to be. I don't expect this to end anytime soon.
Yeah, and if we pull back the lens even further, I mean, that headline about states, it gets even more complicated if you're a global firm and you've got people in Europe and Asia and other places Some of these places obviously have very different policies around vaccination, let alone mandating vaccines. They have different policies in some places around exceptions, or, in the United States, we always think about religious and medical exceptions. In some places in Europe, they allow for previous infection immunity to be an exception. So it really varies a great deal around the world, even more so than just between the states and cities in the US.
And I see good friend Cindy Ballard just put a comment in the chat about Tennessee. Cindy, if you're able to, if you could come off mute, love to ask you a couple questions around that. Let me know if you are able to do that. If not, no big deal.
I can come off mute. I'm in my car, so bear with me. Yeah, so our second largest office is in Tennessee, and because we cannot ask for verification of vaccination, it's been an interesting dialogue both with our leaders and our employees. So we've kept our offices closed, and they remain closed. And I will tell you, we do not have a plan for Tennessee as of right now, because we had a very, very worrisome, engaged discussion between our employee groups of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And it became very difficult. We had to navigate two groups of people that were obviously very passionate about their positions. The vaccinated, of course, didn't mind not showing and verifying their vaccination status, but they very much did not want to be in the office with people who are not. So it's become a very big employee relations issue that we had to navigate. And then we made the decision that we weren't in the position that we wanted to terminate any employees, and we didn't want our employees to feel uncomfortable. So we just didn't open the office.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Cindy. And would you mind telling people your organization?
Oh, of course. So yeah, of course. So I am the Chief Future of Work architect for Universal Music Group.
Great.
Globally.
And obviously a lot of employees in Tennessee, an important geography for your company. But it's, I think that's a great example, Cindy, of just, how tricky this can be, and some of the decisions you got to make on behalf of all employees, right? Employees
Yes.
that are in the office and employees that, are not. And I'm sure that was an executive level discussion inside the organization.
All the way up to our chairman. And I will tell you what was even more complicated. So first of all, we wanted to show the same level of respect for decisions for both groups of employees, and made sure that we had a level of importance regarding of one's choice, even though we do have you cannot come to the office unless you're vaccinated policy. We never wanted to say to those people that they couldn't make their own choice. And we wanted to make sure both groups of people felt that they were valued by the organization. The complexity also is our artists. So Tennessee being our third largest studio location actually in the world, we also have a complexity of our artists, and our artists being vaccinated and not vaccinated. So it's really been an interesting thing to navigate. And as you said, Kevin, all the way up to the chairman. And we have to have a lot of different policies for a lot of different groups of people. And that just brings a level of complexity that, as I'm sure you can imagine, is difficult to manage.
And Cindy, there's a question in the chat from Pamela just around the people in Tennessee. Are they working remotely, or are they on furlough, or something else?
Yeah. So we as a company, which I'm proud to say, we have not terminated any employee as of at least as of today. Not saying that won't change. Right. But we all 100% remote employees in our Tennessee location.
And how do you, as a company, look at remote versus in-office employees overall? Have you had any policies set throughout the company?
Yeah, so we actually went through, I launched, and actually we're in the process of continuing to launch it in New York and here in Los Angeles. We've actually built and gone through a whole analysis around our personas and what those personas mean to our workforce. And we've gone down to the position level for every role in, again, in those three locations. So we break them down into fully remote. And obviously for Tennessee, it's a little hard because everybody's remote. But going forward, we looked at remote means 100% they can work anywhere and do their job from anywhere. Then we have mobile, and mobile basically means that you have to, have access to an office. You'll maybe go there once a week or maybe once a month, probably not more than 3 to 4 times a month. Again, just to access for key strategic meetings. And again, creating that pull and that meaningful, intentional pull to the office when they need it. And then we have hybrid, which is actually 2 to 3 times per week. What's interesting for us and what's been a level of complexity is that we're a very decentralized company. We have 29 business units within our company, and every leader gets to make a decision of what hybrid means, meaning 2 to 3 days a week. And if you pick the days that you want your team to go in, or if you're more flexible and the employee can decide. So we leave that up to the business unit and the management discretion. And then we have people that are still fully in the office. Oddly enough, we only have, out of our total population in the US, which is just under 4,000, only 2.4% are considered fully in the office or in locations. And those are facilities, those are mailroom, those are people that are running our studios. So a very, very low percentage. So that was the approach that we used.
Yeah. And in a way, you're lucky you have such a small percentage that are required to be in office, where other organizations obviously have a much larger percentage. But, what we're going to get into in a little bit, Cindy, is talking about the difference between hybrid and flexible work. But what I love that you just said is you're giving much more autonomy to the managers around having that conversation with employees. And it sounds like the conversation is centered around what's best for the employee and what's best for the organization.
Yeah, it's definitely listen, I will tell you, I'm not sure we have the most sophisticated managers, shocker, right? But again, we're very fortunate. We don't produce widgets. We produce thick. And so we definitely are in a blessed situation there that we don't have to be in the office to do that. Although I will tell you where we struggle, which this won't be a surprise to you, Kevin, is, what we do is highly collaborative and innovative in terms of making music. And yes, the technical aspect of making music can be done in multiple locations using technology. But and our chairman would say that the magic about what we do can't be.
Yeah, that's understandable. Well, hey, I appreciate you chiming in here, Cindy, and feel free to do so going forward. I assume you're in LA traffic, but you're coming through loud and clear. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
One of the things that I'm seeing is a real dichotomy, Tom, and if we think about that Starbucks decision, I was on the phone yesterday with the HR leadership team of a major retailer. And I think what a lot of companies are wrestling with is these vaccine policies and trying to do what's right for the employee base, but at the same time recognizing we're in a war for talent and there's a dearth of talent. And I can just sense it in all the retailers that I talk to and others who have a lot of frontline workers. They're concerned that policies will make it even harder to bring in the talent they need. As a lot of them have experienced, a lot of attrition, of course. And I'd love to hear from others, out in the audience, if you're seeing that as a decision you're wrestling with and struggling with. But it is a very, very interesting time to be an employer, in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's keep the lines open here. Anyone want to chime in? What are you doing? I brought up this slide that I shared last time on the call that was fresh data from a couple of weeks ago that just sort of shows the spectrum of where companies are. This was from a pulse survey we had conducted. Cindy and her company is sort of that third group from the left, not requiring vaccination for employment, but requiring it to be on site. So you see 33% of companies there, 35% on the far right, requiring it for all employees, regardless of work location. So it's taking a stricter stance. But then on the far left, there are those that are not doing that. So anyone else want to come off mute and share, as Cindy did, where are you on this continuum?
Well, I'll note the comment by Mike Purnell here, and Mike, thank you for that. Feel free to come off mute and share. But you said that your organization only lost 12 employees out of about 700 when you put in a vaccine mandate, and that very much mirrors the research that we've done. When companies are putting in these mandates, they aren't losing nearly as many as they thought they might. Even very large companies have told us the same thing. But Mike, is any other color you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, I mean, it was nerve-wracking. We didn't know what it was going to look like. But when deadlines came down and people had a decision to make, most people were vaccinated already. I mean, the high percentage, probably 85%. And then the stragglers, got individual attention, and we really wanted to retain everybody we could. So by the end, I mean, that number became quite small, which we were happy about.
What kind of organization or what kind of workers do you have?
Yeah, it ranges. I mean, office kind of knowledge workers, probably around 100. But most of our workforce is out in workforce housing camps. So a lot of attendants, janitors, cooks, all these, those who you think may, go somewhere else, especially in this current labor market. But we didn't see that. So I think part of that is culture. Part of that is, other things that we try and do for our employees. They didn't really want to go anywhere else. So kind of spent some of those chips to get this in place.
Got it. And we're getting a lot of comments coming in. I appreciate that, Mike. Appreciate you sharing that. There was one question here, Tom, that maybe you can clarify around why.
Anne, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when I first saw the data, I had that response too, Anne. I think the reason is that, first of all, it was a question where you could choose multiple things. So why would people choose more than one of these? I think the reason is that the 52% on the far left encouraged but not required for employment. Those are the key words there. So the idea being that we won't terminate you just for employment. That allows for, say, remote workers that are purely remote to still not choose the vaccine if they don't wish to. But it would allow for 33%, the third one from the left, proof of full vaccination is required to enter work sites. But see, that still means that if you're a remote worker, you wouldn't have to, or if you're a lone truck driver, you wouldn't have to, that sort of thing. Some of the carve outs that even the OSHA ETS had. So that's why there's the overlap. And then obviously the proof of full vaccination for travel, that doesn't come into play there. That's just for a particular activity.
And I can appreciate, Andrew, you work for a large defense and aerospace company and suspended any of your mandates. I think that's been relatively consistent in your industry for sure. There was an earlier comment from Caroline around culture, and that's a topic near and dear to our hearts here at I4CP. And what culture changes are you seeing taking shape as implementing these new processes? I'm talking to countless organizations right now on that very issue, as companies are concerned about how not only vaccine mandates are affecting their culture, but just hybrid and flexible remote work versus in-office work, and what the last couple of years has done to the culture of the organization. And I'm counseling companies to be proactive around their culture. Don't be reactive and just let these events shape your culture. Be intentional around how you want your culture to look long-term. And I'm happy to say there are several companies that are doing that right now. They are undergoing a culture renovation. They're following some of the steps that we outlined in the book and trying to be very purposeful in how they look at their culture. But things have changed for sure. There's no question that we're not going to go back to the way things used to be. Many employees today are demanding flexibility. I think anybody who's in talent acquisition, or if you're a hiring manager, you're seeing that that's almost a requirement by incoming candidates around having that flexibility. And we're going to get into some of those issues. I want to make sure we continue on with the vaccination side here. Uli, good to hear you chime in here. You and I haven't talked in a little while. But you talked about what's happening at Lyft. If you're able to come off mute, I'd love to chat with you for a second.
Yep, go ahead.
So you mentioned that you have 2 shots at the moment and are about to add the booster as a requirement. I think that's the next thing that we're going to see with a lot of companies, is now adding that booster as a requirement. You're at Lyft, and it's very understandable why you have that requirement. But tell us a little bit about that decision inside the company and some of the discussions that you had.
Yeah, and I need to clarify, when we make these decisions, that's for employees of Lyft, that's not for drivers. So yep. First clear separation here. We're a governmental contractor. As such, we are following whatever the CDC is providing to us with regards to clear recommendations. And then we go above and beyond by means of saying we declare everything to be about safety. And when it comes to safety, we do not want to take any risks. As such, what we have in stores is that there is a requirement you have to be vaccinated. If you cannot prove that, that is going to become a reason for termination. We haven't seen a lot of people leaving because of that. We do provide a little bit of flexibility in terms of by when are we going to enforce it. In the meantime, we're using our Workday system to store these informations with HR operations, looking in and verifying the data for every employee. We're adding the booster within the next, I think, 4 to 6 weeks as a requirement. And the next step is going to be, we slightly differentiate always between corporate employees sitting in our offices and those who are sitting in the hubs. So those are individuals who are community associates. They're having direct interaction with the drivers. It's a bit of a different population. What we had in store for them in the past was you need not to be vaccinated because of the fear of potentially losing them as employees. We've actually let go of that because when we did surveys, we recognized that it would be the vast minority who would actually quit because of that as a reason. And as such, we decided, all right, under these circumstances, we are going to require it. And then testing is available for free for those who want to. We've also introduced nobody needs to come to the office for the rest of this year, 2023, to be seen. If you come to the office, you're more than welcome. You have to, of course, be vaccinated. That's a requirement of employment. And then the other thing we do is we provide testing on site. So for groups of 50 people or up to 50 people, which is what we allow, you have to test first. And then you're in a waiting room. And then once you have tested negatively, you can move on to the open space and you can take off your mask if you want to. So that's kind of a quick recap as to where we're at.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you, Uli. And you have such beautiful offices there in Silicon Valley. Are you doing anything different with the office setup for the people that are opting to come in?
Oh, 100%. Every other desk it's hotel desks, so you no longer have a desk space. Every other desk is closed. Meeting rooms that are previously capacity at 10 are down to 4. So everything is 50 or 40-ish% of capacity. Clear mandates with regards to food. So we have free food, but it is pre-packaged, is organized for you. So everything is socially distanced. For me, not really a reason to go to the office, to be honest with you, because if I cannot socially interact with people and keep distance, I'm more than happy to do it from home. And that's kind of the middle ground that we're driving, which is you can do everything socially distant if you want to. You can do it from home if you want to, whatever suits you best. And what we're trying to do is get people to be a little bit more comfortable coming back to the office, having this interaction, maybe for strategy meeting, maybe for a quarterly business review, maybe for an all hands, in a very safe and secure way.
So in a second, as we talk about true flexibility, I want people to think about what Lyft is doing, because that is true flexibility. You are giving the power to employees around where they want to work, when they want to work. We often think about that in terms of employees want to work remotely, but there's a large fraction of employees that would prefer to be in the office. Maybe it's a quieter place for them. Maybe they have much better bandwidth there than they have at home. There's a lot of reasons why people would, might want to take advantage of those beautiful offices. So I love that you've given the employees that power and that autonomy, Uli.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And last thing, just to mention to culture, one issue that we're struggling with is we have these individuals who do not have the choice. And I know there are some people on this call who have similar employees. You do not have the choice. Our community associates need to be in the hub so that when drivers come in, they have somebody to interact with and talk to. So everything we do in terms of flexibility is only applicable to so many people within the organization. And for others, we need to find alternatives, such as, for example, if we say there's a recharge, you don't need to come to work. That doesn't apply to people on the front lines. So we try to find alternative ways to give them a compensation, whether that be monetary or non-monetary, to show them that we value you, and it just comes in different ways. And same is it with the office policy with regards to come to the office. So tricky on the culture side because you cannot communicate to all the same message, but we have to triage and find different ways of how we communicate.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that with the word flexibility, Uli, and everyone else on the call. For those employees, which are a very large number of overall employees, if you look at the entire economy, who don't have the option to work remotely, in some cases, you can have flexibility of hours of day, flexibility of scheduling, flexibility of days of week. There's been some increase in interest in the 4x10 schedule or 4x8 schedule instead of 5 days a week, but a lot of companies, it's not clear that that's really going to take off as a big trend, but at least it's being talked about. But even just more scheduling flexibility within teams and departments, things like that. And then, like you say, monetary compensation, other things that can be given to help compensate for the lack of remote capabilities.
Tom, I know there was a poll that you wanted to bring up, so maybe we do that on.
Yeah, why don't we have two polls, this one maybe to round out this conversation. Thanks, Alex, for bringing it up. I'll let everyone read this and react. Just wanted to get data for the folks on the call. You might need to expand the poll window a little bit to see the full response options. Basically asking, has there been any change in your vaccination policy since the Supreme Court ruling? So I see answers coming in. We'll give everyone another 10 seconds or so to react. Always interesting just to see what the folks on the call, in addition to the data we bring to these calls from our studies and our pulse surveys, always interesting for the cohort on the call what they're seeing.
And Mike comments not applicable in Canada. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, very true.
Hey, Tom, what's the difference between the second and third choice here? As I'm just looking at this.
No change. We are continuing to require full vaccination for all employees, regardless of work site. No change. We are continuing to require full vaccination for all on site. So the first one would include remote workers. So when we had that spectrum, there were 33%.
Okay.
Yeah, 33% said that it even included remote workers, as it sounds like it does for Uli at Corporate Lift. But for many others, it was only if you're coming on site or work on site.
Okay, got it.
All right, the numbers have sort of ended. So thanks, Alex. Let's share those out. So you see here, pretty widespread. And I think, Kevin and I were anticipating this. 32%, the biggest response, no change. We're continuing to require full vaccination for all on-site employees. A bit less, 15%, no change, requiring it for all employees, including remote workers and folks in that kind of situation. We've got a good contingent here, 17%, that are either in healthcare or are federal contractors. So different federal mandates apply to them. So they are also required vaccination with no testing option in those cases. And then you see 27% that are sort of backing off and maybe no longer going to be requiring vaccination, include another 8% as well that maybe we're never going to in the first place. So still a lot of vaccination requirements on the employer side, but for a variety of reasons.
Very good.
So thanks everyone for participating in that. Appreciate that. So Kevin, do we want to pivot to, you've been hinting at this other sort of the broader discussion.
Let's talk about hybrid and flexible work for a second. This is, Tom's got some stats here that I think are interesting, and I'll let you talk to the stats, but this is a topic that we have done research on recently. We'll be coming out with a new study essentially looking at the business case for hybrid and flexible work. And we're intentionally separating those two words, meaning hybrid in a lot of organizations is allowing people to work on-site versus remote, but with very defined days or defined hours in office or on-site. Whereas flexible, and as I said to Uli, we're defining as truly flexible, that the employee and the manager essentially figure out what works best for the company and for the employee. And so it's giving much more autonomy down at that level. And if it's 100% remote, great. If it's, come in whenever you want, then that's fine, much like what Uli just described. Tom, I'll let you talk to some of the things on the slide here.
Yeah, so this is something we're probably going to do a pulse survey in the coming weeks ourselves, but we saw this article from Forbes that sort of an in-demand new job title, at least according to a LinkedIn study, was sort of either VP, director, leader, manager of either hybrid work, remote work, virtual, flexible, whichever word they choose. You see some of the example titles there: hybrid workplace flexibility lead, director of hybrid working, flexible workspace operations manager. I see in the chat, Kelly Cantrell said that they just released a job announcement for someone like this just this past week. So Kelly, are you able to come off mute and speak to what was the thinking there that you feel like you need maybe a responsible, accountable leader to cover this sort of strategy transition?
Sure. So for us, so I work for a company called Management Systems International. We're a subsidiary of Tetra Tech, and we have sort of danced around what our approach is going to be, but we've kind of got a plan, but we aren't really sure. You know, we think it's a good one, but we don't have somebody who's dedicated to this. We've had sort of our executive team working on it, but they've got all their other jobs. And so in order to have somebody really focus on this, we thought that this would be important. We looked at some stuff from GitLab. Actually, I see you've got the quote from the head of remote there. And, you know, I looked at a bunch of job descriptions similar to the titles that you've listed there. We have not up to now had somebody who focused on employee engagement. So we've actually called this position an employee engagement manager, but a large part of the job description is around how do we keep our employees engaged in this remote posture. So our sort of first goal for this person is to really have them come in and look at the approach that we've come up with thus far, what our sort of framework is, which is a very flexible framework, more like you get to choose for the most part. And then once we kind of get their review of that and their recommendations for, you know, how to really make this work, then they would be in charge of making it work. Whether we have networking meetings, whether we have you know, team meetings where people come in once a quarter for a team meeting, what are those going to be like, team building, that type of thing. Some of the things that I've seen from GitLab, I think it was GitLab, were really about documenting processes, making sure that everything is enabled for asynchronous work, so that if you have a question, you can find it somewhere written down. You don't have to ask somebody, which is a very different culture than we've had up to now. It's been very dependent on relationships to learn how to do your job. And so that's something that I'm the training manager, so I've really been focused on that, trying to figure out how can we document some of our processes and things like that. So I'll post our job description, and if you have somebody that you want to recommend it to, send them.
Anybody has recommendations, or maybe you're interested in it yourself, you can reach out to Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for calling out that quote there from Darren at GitLab. GitLab is an interesting company. They're a smaller technology company, but they were fully remote, one of the few companies that were fully 100% remote even before the pandemic. And so you can imagine they've actually been very willing to share their experiences throughout these past 2 years with other companies. They've got a lot of resources. It sounds like you've tapped into some of those. And they have a person who's head of remote, as not surprisingly, given that they've been 100% remote for so long.
And, you know, Tom, there's a number of companies that have now said they're a remote first company. Twitter is one of those. Robinhood, the trading application, is another. And they're taking this approach that the default is not in office, the default is remote. And so I think we will definitely see, as that study predicted, a huge increase in this type of job going forward. And it's something that we're going to continue to follow and see how we can support some of those people.
Yeah, and to that point, let's have our other poll for the day, just to see if there's anyone else on the call who, like Kelly, is considering this kind of a role in their organization, or maybe already posted for it, already have it. So go ahead and answer this poll. Does your organization have plans to establish a leadership role specifically for hybrid or flexible work? It might not even have those words. It might be about remote work or virtual, or, as Kelly said, employee experience, where a large part of it is around work location. That's fine.
And while we're doing that, let's bring our friend Karina from Zillow into the conversation here too. Karina, welcome, and thanks for posting a couple comments here. Zillow has been pretty progressive around remote work, and maybe you can just describe a little bit about what the company's been doing.
Sure. Hey, Kevin. Hey, Tom. So yes, I mean, once the pandemic started, I'd say as early as July that year of 2020, we really realized how well it was working and made the kind of claim that we were going to be fully distributed. And Rich, our CEO, kind of used that phrase, headquartered in the cloud. We were no longer headquartered in Seattle. Everyone was across the country, and we were going to be a distributed company. And so we really early formed a group of people that were working on what we called the future of work and then flexible work. And so there's about 2 to 3 people, I'd say, that are really dedicated to that work. And it's been everything from how do we remodel our offices, and which offices do we keep, which ones do we close, and what are they going to look like, and what do we use them for, to our new norms, like how do we think about scheduling meetings and times, and are there new norms that we need to put in place to operate in this fully distributed world. And then also as somebody just mentioned about what we call Z retreats, so getting together in person. So when would we get together in person? What does that look like? What's the budget? And so that team is really focused on kind of the breadth of everything to do with flexible work. And it's been good. We've definitely, like, I was in the office yesterday for the first time in a long time in some of our newly renovated spaces, and we did a hybrid kind of offsite, onsite, and it worked really well. And we have new technology that's been really awesome to kind of bring people in who couldn't travel in, but also great to be in person in our new offices. So lots to still figure out, but we've been really lucky and fortunate to kind of move forward quickly.
And your CEO, Rich, that Karina is referring to, he's the founder of Expedia. He founded Zillow, also founded Glassdoor. Very progressive guy, and Rich Barton. And so love the attitude that you guys have taken today, Karina.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely feel lucky to have a clear vision to execute on, which is nice.
While you were sharing all that, Karina, I ended the poll and shared out the results. So interesting and not surprising that the top response was no for now at 49%, but also interesting that we do see 16% already have this kind of a leadership role, 3% saying that they're having plans to create it, 8% saying we're considering it. So add those up and it's over a quarter, and then another quarter saying don't know. So interesting that the idea that you'd have a completely new, let's say, fairly high level leadership role in an organization, that doesn't come along very often. I think we saw it with chief diversity officers a couple of years ago. There was a huge uptick there, and we've probably seen it in some other areas, maybe in the 90s with heads of quality when that was a major movement. But it doesn't happen too often that we see this kind of a shift. So it's definitely something to keep our eye on.
And I want to call out Samir and thank him for keeping me honest here in my comments. So I said Twitter was remote first, and he said, "Well, hold on, that's not necessarily true." Samir, are you able to come off mute and share a little bit about Twitter? Maybe not. Okay. But just to paraphrase for those of you not reading the comments, yeah, he's got double duty. No problem, Samir. They believe in offices, and the guiding principle is to believe in individual choice and flexibility. And I'll say for Twitter, that's been really a principle for a long time, pre-pandemic, where I was always struck early on that Twitter didn't have desk phones. They eliminated those years and years ago and just relied on mobile phones. And so they've always had a more of a freedom attitude, I think, towards the employee base. And I think that comes across during the pandemic as well. So hopefully I didn't, too misrepresent Twitter there, Samir. Tom, I'll let you talk a little bit to this study that we had done a little while ago around different elements that an organization is looking at from an EVP perspective.
Yeah, so EVP is employee value proposition, of course. And so we wanted to find out, what things are most important, what's proven most effective at particularly attracting new talent. Your employee branding, your employee value proposition, of course, critical there, but different companies, have had different results in terms of what they most emphasize in that value proposition. And it was interesting to see, and perhaps not surprising too much, given the times we're in, that the sort of runaway number one answer here, flexibility and work arrangements at 55% of respondents, was the clear number one answer. Ongoing development opportunities, L&D, training, career pathways, that's always a top response to questions like this going back many years. Healthcare benefits, of course, always at the top of this list. And you see all the other ones listed there in descending order. Compensation sort of in the middle of the results. But again, very interesting that the top response now is flexibility in work arrangements.
And what I worry about, Tom, are companies who maybe don't have a flexible approach or a flexible view of things, losing out on talent. I was working with a company very recently that I witnessed lose two excellent candidates because they just felt that to be successful, you had to be in the office, or you at least had to be near the office so you could be there, at least 3 days a week or so. And even though there was a lot of interest by these candidates in making trips to the office on a regular basis, the sheer fact that they didn't live nearby made it not work. And it's tough, I think, to limit your candidate pool to a small geography like that around the office. And I think more and more companies are going to recognize that if they really want to open the talent pool up, they've got to have a more flexible approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And along the lines of modifying your EVP, I see Andrew in the chat saying that they're looking to modify it. Andrew, are you able to come off mute if you're not pulling double duty with other responsibilities and chime in a little bit more about what you're looking at maybe changing?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, I think we all have double duties or triple duties these days, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's a constant. Yes. So basically, over the past year, we've just recently been looking at some of our past year's activities, plus in various employee surveys. We did an inclusion index survey. We have exit surveys. We've done some focus groups, et cetera. And we do think we need to modify some of our ideas in terms of this flexibility and what we're talking about, and the reason for working, the mission and the reason for working at a large defense and aerospace company. So not exactly sure how we're going to change it yet, but we're just taking a lot of that data in, and there will be some changes in that, just not sure exactly what it's going to be yet.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And you're at BAE, a company we've been working with for a number of years, and can sort of appreciate some of the complexities working at such a large defense contractor.
And one of the issues, we're also a federated company. And so someone else mentioned earlier, they have a lot of different business units. We have some different business units that operate independently. And so they're somewhat developing some of their own EVPs and their own communication messages going out too, because some are much more manufacturing, some are much more service oriented. So we have some differences there too.
Very good. I don't want to skip, Tom. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing that. I don't want to skip what Cindy had put in chat about the skills needed for that remote work role. And Cindy, I don't know if you're still with us, but you're typing. Great. Maybe you could share some of what you put in chat.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm new to this role. I've been, I used to be a CHRO. Now I'm the chief future of work architect for the company. And I have to say it has definitely challenged. And I have believe it or not, even though I'm in the music business, I have a group of executives who the average tenure is 21 years. And so they're very set in their ways. And I would say the two things that I've been the most challenged in terms of just honing my skills and using the skills that I've honed is being able to be really knowledgeable about the subject and be able to, I would say, influence and negotiate with them to get them to where we think the company needs to be to ensure we're not losing out on talent and to making, to not have the negative outcomes of not being flexible. And so the change management and the influencing and the negotiating skills required in this role, don't underestimate that.
Great advice. Cindy, it's something that I think we're going to see evolve over time, but I love that advice you just gave around those skills. And it's making me think we as a company could do more around trying to help others identify those skills as well. As Lisa just put into the chat, it's hard to balance the desire of the leaders with the expectations of employees.
Yes.
And that is summed up extremely well, Lisa. So thanks for saying that, because that's what I've felt over the last couple of years, that it's been this balance between those two factions. And in some companies, they're in great sync. In other companies, it's wildly different viewpoints. And I think that's where we're struggling sometimes with this conversation.
One of the things companies have been doing, Kevin, is obviously greatly expanding their listening strategy. I think at this point, we've all heard the phrase, listening method, listening strategy a lot of times over the past 2 years. But companies have moved away from just an annual employee experience survey or employee engagement survey, and at least have quarterly surveys, if not monthly. Or in the case of Microsoft or Amazon, I think they do check-ins, with a slice of their employee base on a daily basis, and so have a lot of data. And so I think we're going to continue to see that trend grow as a way to get input from the employee side over to the leaders. This question, though, that we just polled on and brought up from the Forbes article around, are you going to create a singular leader or rely more on a committee approach? This actually came up on one of our exchange calls. For those of you that are new to I4CP, you might not know that one of the member benefits of I4CP is that we have 6 exchanges. These are all very practical groups, gathered around various issues. You see them listed there, things like performance management, workforce planning. We had a meeting of our employee well-being exchange last week, and this issue of dealing with all the changes that are going on, employee value proposition, the role that flexible and hybrid work is playing, and whether or not you need to have a singular leader to really take this on and help shepherd, like Cindy said in her chat message, the change management of this through. Might not be a permanent position, but at least for the next, say, 1 to 5 years, it might be a real critical position. And there's quotes here that I've anonymized from 2 individuals that were a part of that exchange, 2 I4CP member companies. And the top one noting that, yes, in fact, they do. They've pulled together some leaders into a transformation team, but the leader of that team reports directly to the CEO. That's how highly important they're placing on this as a change. And then the one at the bottom, a different individual in the exchange said, we're leaning into steering teams that are cross-functional, so similar in that regard. They have one for future of work, and they have one for employee well-being. So interesting there as well. And Kevin, I've heard from a lot of companies that whether they have a singular leader who's accountable for this, for hybrid and flexible and remote work, or whether they've got a broader steering committee approach, at least for now, as we saw in our poll, it's definitely a trend that everyone is sort of moving towards.
And I'm going to see if Lisa wants to come off mute here too, because she's putting some good things in chat because she's leading this for her organization. Lisa, are you able to join us?
Yes, yeah, and sorry I was late. I was in another meeting talking a very robust discussion about all of this. So apologies.
We'll forgive you this time,
yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have, as I mentioned in the chat, we do have a team of people that have been assembled since the beginning of the pandemic, and I just stepped into this role about 4 months ago. But we do ask employees, like we have a Voice of the Employee survey that we've been asking regularly how people are feeling. And, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, right? Because that's where sometimes the disconnect between those expectations of employees and what the leader wants to do are different. And so we have to figure out how to balance that. And what we're really trying to ground ourselves in are some guiding principles that are foundational to what we want to achieve, some key messages that we're going to get realigned on as an executive team to make sure that we're all saying the same things in the same way, and then really creating those moments to bring people into the office, because I do feel that we have lost something with being virtual, but we have forgotten what we've lost because it's been so long. So I think if we knew at the beginning of this that we'd be in talking and having this conversation 2 years later, we may have made different decisions. I think we all thought it was going to be temporary, and our mindset is sometimes still in that temporary mode, but now we've become so comfortable. So where it made sense to send everybody home and people could wrap their heads around that. It was really uncomfortable in the beginning. And now if we force people back, it's not going to make sense because it's working, and it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So I think we have to really, it's like we said, it's that balance, and how do we really strike that balance and not lose our entire workforce in the process.
And Lisa, do you mind sharing what industry or company you're with?
Yeah, insurance.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all very interesting and well said, Lisa. I think at least folks in the United States, we've been on this journey. It started with 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it's been 2+ years to transform your business.
Yeah.
I think is what we've morphed into.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that we've got these committees being formed. I also want to just call out the quote that Carrie Naiman had in our chat. Carrie works for I4CP, and she's actually the author of the report that I described that we're coming out with around hybrid and flexible work. And she brought up something I hadn't really considered, but some companies are putting in ERGs, or you might call them affinity groups or BRGs, specifically around remote hybrid work, which sounds like an interesting practice to me. Carrie, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I mean, I can just say that it's come up a few times, but as we were talking about employee listening strategies and also really ensuring that there's no have versus have not culture created, and really keeping an eye on DE&I as it pertains to flexible and remote work. This is just something that's starting to be talked about, and it feels like it could be a really good way for companies to continue to ensure that all those different aspects are being paid attention to and not forgotten.
Yeah, great point.
Occurs to me, we've done a lot of research over the years on BRGs and ERGs, and in particular, the role that they can play in leadership development for the people that take on the leadership roles of those affinity groups that can help to develop them into higher level leaders in the organization. This particular BRG, ERG, the people that lead it, I could see them sort of morphing or growing into a leadership position like the ones we're talking about here around remote and flexible work. If they're willing to raise their hand to lead the ERG, they may find themselves with a whole new position within a matter of months.
Good point. Well, Tom, I know we're running out of time here. We got a couple wrap-up things, so I'll turn it back to you to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier on the call, I laid out the fact that these Getting Hybrid Work Right meetings are part of an ongoing Next Practices monthly series. The next one on this topic, Getting Hybrid Work Right, will be February 17th. We're going to have Bree Kastning from McKinstry. She was featured in a case study we did recently on office redesign for the future of work. So we'll be delighted to have her as a guest with Kevin and I on February 17th. But again, we have these meetings every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time, with different functional areas in the alternate week. So hope to see you at whatever calls are of interest to you. And then lastly, just a quick reminder again, our in-person, so excited about that in-person conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, March 14th to the 17th. We hope you can join us. You can see here the lineup of just some of the speakers. Like Kevin said earlier, a great mix of thought leaders and leaders of HR and other HR functional areas. We're still adding new speakers. We just added Dan Pink as the latest headliner. So look forward to seeing whoever can join us there. Again, no vendors, no consultants. So it's a really great conference for HR leaders in particular. So with that, I want to thank everyone who contributed. We had great discussion, audio and on chat today. Thank you, Kevin, as always.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks to everybody who we just impromptu pulled into the conversation. Appreciate your willingness to share what's happening in your organizations.
Very good. Well, look forward to seeing folks on another call coming up soon. Bye-bye for now.
Take care, everybody.